Hello, everyone. Welcome on into another Rooted Podcast episode, of course, brought to you by our awesome friends over at Green Bros, home of the world's leading cannabis harvesting solutions. Tim Strommel coming to you once again from our beautiful Rooted Podcast production studios out here in Denver, Colorado. Thanks again for tuning in. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. We always appreciate the support, and your subscription helps us fund and grow the show so we can bring you bigger, better content all the time. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're checking out our podcast. Even if you don't want to listen to future episodes, just subscribe and help us out. It's free, it takes no time, and we'd appreciate it. Also, go check out Rooted TV, our bi-monthly web series featuring interviews, debates, a whole lot more. We just interviewed Tommy Chong and Jim Belushi on the show. That was a ton of fun. You can also go back and find those podcasts in our podcast streams, wherever you're listening to this show. And you can find Rooted TV streaming on High Times TV, Cannabis Club TV, and of course on our website, stayrooted.com. Pumped for the show this afternoon as we're about to welcome in Naomi Granger, co-founder and COO of Dope CFO, a company that is showing you the path to wealth and freedom in your cannabis accounting firm. Interesting topic this afternoon. I mean, I've talked a lot about banking on the show. I've talked about some finance in the industry on this show. This is kind of a selfish interview for me because I'm going to ask a lot of questions that I want to know. So hopefully you want to know these questions too, okay? Naomi works with cannabis CEOs to help them navigate accounting and tax challenges so they can maximize their cash flow, minimize their tax burden, and be fully prepared for the auditors when they come out. Another interesting thing I'll talk about is auditing in this episode, which seems like a dry subject if you're not super interested in it, but we're going to approach it in a way that I think you'll be interested, so stay tuned for that. Long story short, the financial sector of the cannabis industry is something that really intrigues me, kind of like I just said. I mean, a razor-tight margin in this industry determines your success or failure of your business, and tough banking regulations make it even harder, okay? So you're truly up against it in this industry. Tough regulations, the lack of proper financial literacy that you need to run a successful company. All these things are things that Naomi deals with on a daily basis, okay? So we're going to talk to her about it. And Dope CFO runs the nation's only training program for accountants who specifically want to be trained for the cannabis sector, which I thought was super cool because no one's really tackling that in the space. And it seems like such a need and a problem that needs to be addressed. So that service seems pretty awesome. We're going to welcome in Naomi in just a second. But first, I want to let you know this podcast brought to you by our awesome friends over at Green Bros, home of the world's premier dry harvesting solutions, from small-scale cultivations all the way up to your big daddy commercial grows. Green Bros dry trimmers, trichome extractors, destemmers, sorters, precision batchers, rosin presses, the box, the new model M trimmer. All these machines want to save you time, money, and labor. Check them out, greenbros.com, or call 844-DRY-TRIM to schedule a free demo in your area today. That's 844-DRY-TRIM. You can also check out Green Bros at the Lift Show in Toronto, June 6th to 9th, NCIA San Jose, July 22nd to 24th, and MJ BizCon in Vegas, December 11th to the 13th. So if you like to plan ahead, go ahead and plan to stop by the Green Bros booth at MJ BizCon. I promise it'll be impressive. They had one of the biggest booths last year as well. So make those plans if you're in the area. Okay, without any further ado, let's welcome in our guest this afternoon. Her name is Naomi Granger. She is the co-founder and COO of Dope CFO. Okay, you can check them out, dopecfo.com. Naomi, thanks for joining us. How are you this afternoon?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're pumped to have you. Now, Dope CFO, it's very interesting because people in the cannabis space know Dope as like a magazine and entertainment source. You guys go with the name Dope CFO. Tell me what the name stands for, and then if you could, give me like the elevator speech as to what you do over there.
So it's just the double entourage, dope being the slang term for marijuana, as well as a cool word, and CFO. And it's kind of like we try to teach our accountants to be lifestyle accountants. And so we want them to be able to get paid what they're worth, have more freedom and flexibility in their schedule, and to be able to have be less stressed. So a lot of times accountants, we go into this industry, and when you're a small accounting practice, you take on dentists and restaurants and different small businesses that aren't making much money. So that means that, well, they're making money, making maybe $250,000, $500,000, maybe up to $1 million. However, their budget for accounting is very limited because of their income level. But when you're looking at these when you're looking at these cannabis companies, these companies are bringing in millions of dollars, and they have a much larger room for paying accountants a lot more money. And so you're able to get charged with what you're worth, and you're not just gouging them and charging them excessive fees for no reason. It's a lot of work involved in doing accounting for cannabis companies. They're highly regulated. They have significant tax bills. They don't have any a lot of the software is not very user friendly. It requires detailed reconciliations and things. So there's a lot of work involved. But when you're able to get charged, when you're able to get paid what you're worth, then you're able to have less clients, and you're focusing on one niche. And so you're not bouncing around, and you're able to just focus on that niche, have less clients, get paid what you're worth, and then that makes you have more freedom and more flexibility in your schedule.
And I think you nailed it in your answer. And I don't think people understand out there that the average accountant, like you said, might not have the ability to work with such large businesses, because when you start out as a small accountant, like you said, you work with a lot of small businesses. But the cannabis space is so nuts. Like, it doesn't matter how small or big your company is, the revenue is almost always there, and people need to be managing it. And I've worked closely with some cannabis brands and know that accounting has been an issue for them. Taxes have been an issue, all that stuff. So I'm excited to dive into a lot of this. Before I get into more specific questions, Dope CFO runs the nation's only training program specifically for accountants who want to enter the cannabis space. Now, what makes this program specifically tailored towards the cannabis space?
So we teach you, so we assume that you already understand accounting. We don't teach you debits and credits, and we don't teach you how to use QuickBooks or fill out tax forms. What we teach is what you need to know specific to cannabis. So I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with the Tax Code IRC 280E.
That's a lot of numbers and letters. I bet that bet they don't know.
It's a lot of numbers and letters, but it is one sentence, but it's a very powerful sentence. And it says, if you are trafficking a Schedule 1 or a Schedule 2 controlled substance, you are still required to pay taxes. However, you cannot write off any operating expenses. And so these companies, but cost of goods sold is part of the definition of gross receipts, so they can write off cost. But what makes it complicated is if you were to go to a grower and ask them how much does it cost to grow a pound of pot, they're not going to be able to tell you. They're not cost accountants. They know that they may have used a clone or got some seeds for a couple of dollars. They planted them. They used soil, water. They had an expensive lighting system over them. They had labor, electricity, all those things. But they wouldn't be able to tell you, okay, I spent about 50% of my labor on this plant and 25%. They would not be able to tell you how much it costs to grow it. So we teach accountants how to do proper cost accounting in this space. And then further, when you read deeper into the code and some of the guidance that governs this industry, not only do you have to do proper cost accounting, but in order to qualify for any deductions, the books have to be done under GAAP accrual accounting, which is that's an accounting term. GAAP is Generally Accepted Accounting Practices, GAAP. And that's something you typically never see as a small accountant, because it's something that you only have to do if you are an SEC, if you're a publicly traded company in the U.S. So if the SEC is governing you, they require GAAP accounting, but most small businesses don't even have to think about it. And so if a business owner has an accountant in place and doesn't understand accrual accounting, they're at high risk for being audited and having all of their deductions being disallowed because their books just weren't being kept accurately. And we're seeing it time and time again come up as of late in the news.
It seems like such a rabbit hole and so many pitfalls if you don't know what you're doing. Before I get to a couple other questions, tell me about your background. You've worked with some pretty big companies, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so my background is accounting. I studied accounting in college, and then I went straight to public accounting, and I got my CPA license. And so I've worked at 3 of the 4 Big Fours. I've worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. And then I've worked in the internal audit section for the Home Depot, and I've worked as a controller at Morgan Stanley. So I have a very deep background in accounting. And then my final role before I went to become an entrepreneur, I was a consultant. And so I was consulting at a variety of different industries and different companies. So I know how to do the audit and understand, what the book should look like. And I also know how to prepare the books from doing my consulting gig and creating SEC financial reports and those things.
Now, I always ask this question when I come across someone like you who's a CPA, you have an MBA as well. Why go into accounting? It doesn't seem like the sexiest thing to go into, but people who go into it always speak so well of it. So why did you choose to go into accounting?
Well, I was always good with numbers, but I'm still horrible with words. Like I always find typos and errors and stuff, and English still is not my it still confuses me. But I was always good with numbers. 1 + 1 is always going to equal 1, or is always going to equal 2. But with English, there might be silent letters and things like that, and so I enjoyed it. So I went to I got my MBA, and I got a concentration in all business. So when I got my MBA, I got to study all business. So finance, marketing, accounting. And then I just decided to kind of hone in on the accounting. And I did a couple of internships while I was doing while I was getting my degree. So I did internships in tax, and I quickly realized that I did not like tax at all. But I did internships doing audit and external audits and doing financial reports, and I enjoyed that. So I ended up going into public accounting and becoming an auditor.
Now, I want our listeners to come away from this show with an understanding of how interesting or maybe difficult it can be to operate in the cannabis space. And you help these companies navigate a myriad of concerns. So let's start with compliance. Why is it such a big issue in the companies that you're seeing and working with? And then what are you doing to work with clients to address this big ongoing issue of ever-changing regulation and compliance?
Yeah, so the reason why it's a big issue is because if you just look in the news, there's all these recent court cases that were just filed where these companies are getting millions and millions of dollars of back taxes. They're getting penalties to the tune of $70,000 just for not having accurate books and records. That's just the penalty amount, not their back taxes. They're getting prison sentences for not being compliant. So there is, and not only, it's not just, oh, you did this wrong, here's your $1 million bill and a slap on the wrist. It's years and years of litigation that they're going through. They're losing their license, they're getting their businesses shut down, and the IRS is just going to pick up their audits during 2019 because there are a lot more states on board. When we just started a little bit over a year ago. So it was January of 2018. That's when we started training. And at that point, I think there were only maybe 7 rec that were legal and less than 30. But now there's up to maybe 33 that are medical and 11 that are rec states that are legal in the marijuana industry. So as this picks up, and there's a lot that are on the ballot right now, like each month, you're seeing more and more states become legal. And so the states and the federal government want to make sure that they're getting their revenues. And so they're auditing these businesses, and they're getting huge penalties and fines and consequences for not doing their books properly. So that's the risk, why it's important. And what makes it more complicated is because since it's state driven, so you have your federal law, which is one thing. And so you can put that across all companies, but then each individual state has their own guidance. Like the federal law says you cannot write off any operating expenses on your taxes, but however, some states allow you to write off your operating expenses on the state taxes, and some states follow federal, and they will not allow you to write off any of those expenses. So you have to understand your state, and you also have to understand not only the financial piece, but the compliance piece when you're doing the books for any cannabis company.
Or you don't worry about understanding it and you talk to Dope CFO and you tell them to just understand it for you because it sounds so complicated. Now, I want to get back to something you said, auditing, in just a second. But I'm interested in what the average financial intelligence is when you encounter people that reach out to you to kind of get this part of their business figured out? Because when people hear like, oh, back taxes they owe, or people getting prison sentences, I think a lot of people are under the impression that it's because of people wanting to deceive the government or wanting to be deceptive on taxes. And I'm sure there are some people, and that's the case sometimes. But I'm also pretty sure that some people just don't know what they don't know, and then all of a sudden it comes back to get them. So I was wondering, when you talk to these people and start working with them, what's their average kind of intelligence when it comes to their finances and accounting and taxes?
Yeah, so it's correct that a lot of people just don't know what they don't know because the industry is still being developed. So things aren't ironed out. You can't just Google it and find white papers and guidance on this is how you do it. And a lot of these people who we're seeing in the news, some of them have been deceptive because it's tough. Like the taxes are really high. They're not able to make ends meet. They're in the red just because their tax bill is so high. And so it's kind of tempting to kind of slide something into the black market and kind of be gray instead of going all the way legal. So we do see that. But then we also see a lot of these companies that are getting bad legal advice and bad advice from their accountants. So a lot of these companies are trying to circumvent the code, the IRC code 280E that I mentioned earlier. They're trying to figure out ways around it. Let's form a bunch of legal entities and transfer money here and there and make it look like we're not even doing cannabis anymore, and then write off all these expenses over in this other business. And they have attorneys who are giving them that type of advice and saying, do this. And then the IRS is coming and saying substance over form. I don't care how many legal entities you have. You are selling cannabis and you're just transferring money over there. You're the owner of all these legal entities. It's all the same to us. And so then they look at just the substance and they're saying, you owe taxes for this and this and that. And they're not really knowing that this is going to come, or that's what they've created. And sometimes they're getting double taxed because they've transferred money. So now they have income here and income here where they pay taxes on. So it's just kind of like, just not knowing and trying to figure it out and relying on bad advice.
Now, is it different, Naomi, for companies who touch the plant versus like growers and dispensaries versus the ancillary companies like tech or harvest companies, stuff like that? Is there differences there?
Yeah, so the ancillary companies don't have to worry about they can write off all their operating expenses and everything as long as you're not touching the plant. The code says if you're trafficking a controlled substance. So as long as you're not selling the plant, then you're fine. The only thing the ancillary businesses have to worry about, though, is banking. When the banks find out that that's where you make your money, sometimes they can shut you down. We've had retirement accounts shut down for accountants because somehow Fidelity found out that they were servicing cannabis and just shut them down. We tell our members to not say, Cannabis Accountant RS or whatever in their business name. Just say, whatever, Greenleaf, mine is Greenleaf CFO, or Anchor Advisors, or just a name that's general, and it can mean anything. So that, because if the banks were to see marijuana or cannabis in your name, they more than likely will not open an account for you, no matter if you're touching the plant or not. So that's the biggest thing that we're seeing with the ancillary businesses.
And so you're an ancillary business. And so I've had issues or heard of issues or talked to friends who have had issues all opening bank accounts, keeping bank accounts. On my side, I only talk really with the ancillary business. So I don't deal with a lot of people who grow or companies that sell via dispensaries, especially on my show. It's mostly ancillary companies. So how do you go about banking in the cannabis industry? Have you guys had problems at Dope CFO?
We haven't yet. We just use a general business name. We've had our bank accounts open prior to starting with the cannabis, so we haven't had any problems yet. We have had retirement account shut down, but that was it. And we've had problems with, collecting money from our students because things like PayPal and Stripe and all those companies, they don't want to have anything to do with it either. So merchant service providers and all those companies, especially at dispensaries and things, it's really hard for them to collect money. You have to have cash, or they have these cash cards. that are like ATM cards that you put money on, and then it's it just gets really complicated. So hopefully the banking issue is something that's going to go away this year. We know that there is some legislation out there to help with that. The federal government realizes it's ridiculous, and that's just the hugest. If the federal government wants all of their money, they might as well let the banks track the money so that they can get their revenues. So yeah. Hopefully that goes away this year.
And there's something I want to ask you about auditing in just a second. But before I do, I just want to let our listeners know this podcast brought to you by our friends at Green Bros, home of the world's leading cannabis harvesting solutions. And Green Bros just announced the launch of their new Model M dry trimmer, which takes all the amazing traits from your Green Bros 420 model and ramps everything up a notch. We're talking surgical stainless steel construction, and an impressive yet simplified design means this new dry trimmer still puts up serious volume while being easier to break down, clean, and reassemble. Also, the control panel has been moved outside the machine. All the electric parts that you really couldn't wash before because you'd have to be worried about getting them wet. Now you can power scrub, you can wash down your machine without fear, speeding up your turn time in between strains and processing even faster than you ever have before. Also, the new stainless steel design means no nooks or crannies, ensuring that your machine stays clean and compliant with regulations now and hopefully for years to come. This is another Green Bros machine you have to see to believe. Hit them up at 844-379-8746, 844-379-8746, or info@greenbros.com to learn more. We're talking with Naomi Granger, the co-founder and COO of Dope CFO. You can check them out at dopecfo.com, of course, linked in the description of the podcast below. They are showing you the path to wealth and freedom in your cannabis accounting firm. Naomi, what is one of the biggest things you see companies doing wrong right now, either when they come to you or when you just look from the outside at what they're doing? What are you seeing as some of the biggest mistakes people are making?
They're not doing the accounting at all. So in this space, it's, they're doing very minimal what they understand to do. So they're not doing the cost accounting. They're not doing the accrual accounting. And the issue is that a lot of the mid-tier and bigger accounting firms, the ones that would typically take on a client this size and the ones that would typically have a workforce of people who can, who are trained in GAAP accounting and who can do the research in order to do things right, they're not even in this space. They're not touching it. It's still federally illegal, and they won't service these clients. And so a lot of these companies are using family members. They're using their spouse or their daughter or a neighbor down the street that took an accounting class and who's not very well trained in accounting. So they're just doing what they understand how to do. They are pulling it into QuickBooks. They're just using a general chart of accounts that they just pick one in QuickBooks when you need a very specialized chart of accounts in order to do it right. And that's something that we provide in our training program. And then we see them capturing some transactions, but not all transactions. If they don't have support for it, they don't really know what to do. They don't know how to do it properly. And and a lot of these businesses came from the black market and are trying to go legal. So you were in the black market for 10 years and you weren't required to do anything, right? It was just completely illegal. And so to transition, there's a learning curve there. And a lot of times people, it doesn't just click in your head, oh, I'm legal now, so I have to do X, Y, Z. It's more like I've been operating this way for 10 years. You need somebody to come in and show you how to transition your finances so that you're legal.
Naomi, are companies in the cannabis space, in your opinion, are they more likely to be audited than just, let's say I went out and started a roofing company, I'm guessing cannabis has a target on its back, right?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, because of the high cash and revenue. So the more revenue you're making, the more risky you are, and the more the IRS is going to look at you and make sure that you're doing things properly. Secondly, because it's so highly regulated and they know that there's a lot of room for error and it's a quick win for them to come in there and just, audit these cannabis companies and get a couple $1 million from them. And then they are being audited every single quarter by the state and by the banks. So there's all these things. So every single quarter we have to turn in our financial reports to the banks that are banking these companies. They're reviewing them. They're coming back with questions and saying, hey, why did this number change? Why did that change? So they're actually looking at these statements, and then, they're at risk for losing their bank account if things don't line up. And then the states are coming in, making sure that they're compliant and that they're not violating any state regulations. And so they're not only being audited by the IRS, but you got your banks, you got your state, you got OSHA, there's all these regulatory agencies that are looking at these companies very closely to make sure that things are being done properly.
It's crazy, too, because when you listen to everything you just said, it makes you wonder why anyone would want to do this. It seems like such a headache. I don't know why people do, but at the same time, go ahead.
Okay, so it's the long-term benefit. So we do have some clients who are actually already in talks with the Budweisers of the world, the Philip Morrises of the world, the cosmetic companies, the oil companies, and they know that if they're able to ride this wave, that they can have these huge, $100 million, billion-dollar buyouts down the road, because once it becomes federally legal, Budweiser is going to have a product. I mean, everybody is going to have a cannabis product. And so it's going to explode at that point. So we have some clients who come in and they're still trying to be shady. They don't want to tell us everything, or they don't want to give us support for things. And a lot of times we just let those clients go because that puts our CPA license at risk. But then we have other clients that come in and they want everything done perfectly because they know that around 3 to 5 years from now, whenever it becomes legal, they're going to be ready for huge valuations and a nice buyout and a nice paycheck down the road.
Which is another reason why, and as this podcast goes on, I realize that it's more and more important that we talk about this. And I'm almost mad we haven't talked before because it seems like such an important part of your business that no one pays attention to until it's too late. Or I'm sure there are people who are paying attention to it, maybe too late, who knows. But just the idea that you guys can come in and you can basically overhaul it, or you get the tax accountants ready to be thrown into that company and just really get them on the right path. Now, I know that you've worked in like SEC filings and getting those documents ready. And that's, if I'm not mistaken, and pardon my ignorance, but that's what you would do like before you filed to go public, right? You'd have to get all those filings in.
So before you go public, you create an IPO document where you create financials that are in line with the guidance. So the SEC governs public companies. Securities and Exchange Commission, they govern public companies. So you submit the application to the SEC, and then when you're approved and you go public, every single quarter and every single annual, you have to prepare SEC documents for public companies. We're not preparing SEC level documents for these cannabis companies, but we are making sure that they're being done under accrual accounting, which is required by the guidance.
Which is interesting because I know you have that extended history past where you've done the SEC filings. And that's just another reason why I think this interview is important and your company is important, because you're not just someone who's cut her teeth in the cannabis space. You come from mainstream business where the cannabis industry isn't there yet, but you've done this stuff that's past that so that you're able to get these companies set up, like you said, for an acquisition down the road or what have you. Now, I want to go back to audits for a second because this is something that I think is so interesting. When these companies are getting audited, is it state auditors? Is it federal auditors from the IRS? Is it a mix of all of it? How is this happening?
Yeah, they have several agencies coming to audit them. So the federal auditors come in and do it. The state auditors come in separately and audit them. The banks audit them. OSHA audits them. Like I visited a grow house here in Nevada. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and he tells me once a quarter they come. He just made friends with the state people, the state agencies. They come in once a quarter. They look around. They make sure that things are compliant. Everything down from how high your fence is to how many rolls of toilet paper you have in the bathroom. They look at everything and make sure that you are operating and you're compliant. And so they know that that's going to happen, and that's just a part of their everyday business to have these people coming by and checking them out.
Naomi, something I don't understand, and this might be out of the purview of questions you can answer, I don't know. But what I don't understand about the audit process is the IRS is a federal agency. Cannabis is still federally illegal. So you have the IRS, so you have the federal government basically auditing illegal businesses, like justifying that they're a business and should pay taxes, but at the same time saying you're illegal. and you shouldn't be an operator. I don't know. It just seems so weird. Like, you can't give them stable banking, but you want them to pay you, but we need to make sure they're paying enough, but we haven't established what they should be paying us because it's an illegal business. Doesn't this all seem so weird? It seems like the mob in the 70s. Like, there's not really any rules. It's just give us the money or we'll come after you for it.
Yeah, it's just the way our government is run. And it actually started back in the 80s. So there's this big drug lord who was selling all types of illicit drugs, cocaine, heroin, everything that you could think of. But he was paying his taxes, and he was writing off all of his expenses and everything and paying his taxes properly. And the IRS could not get him for tax evasion. And so in the 80s, that's when they developed IRC 280E and said, hey, we can't give him the benefit of writing off all of his operating expenses and things because it's causing such a public health crisis what his business is doing. So the businesses that are trafficking a controlled substance should not be able to benefit from all of the government write-offs and things like that, but we still need to collect money or else it'll be tax evasion. And so it's just, we can go down a huge rabbit hole on all the illegal stuff, because if you even think about it, companies like Pfizer, they're selling Schedule II substances, but they're not subject to all these rules. So that's just a whole nother can of worms that we can open up, where the government is just kind of making up the rules as they go and making the rules to benefit them.
and enforcing it when we choose to, I think, is such an interesting way to proceed. And obviously it's been like this for a long time, so we're not breaking any news here, but it's just nuts when you really get high level on it and look down at what's actually happening. Now, in terms of minimizing taxes with the companies you work with, how are you going about that? Like, how are companies not taking advantage of every sort of tax break they can get? And I'm guessing when you meet with them and tell them about this stuff, they're like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that.
They don't really get a lot of tax breaks, and we don't focus on making sure that they're paying the least amount of taxes. We focus on to make sure that they're paying taxes properly, and that they're doing cost accounting properly. And so sometimes we come into companies and they're allocating everything to cost. So they have, $1 million of revenue and then $900,000 of cost, and so they're paying taxes on $100,000, which is not going to fly. 90% of your business is not cost of goods sold. And so that's a huge red flag. And so we make sure that the cost, they're writing off all the costs that they can that's legally allowed, but then that it's still a reasonable amount and it doesn't look like, we're trying to push through all these costs. So they still do have these significant tax bills, but at least if the auditors were to come and look at that, they don't have to worry about getting hit with these huge bigger bills, because when the auditors come, they look into things and it might be things that we thought were perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden they're like, nope, we're not allowing it, because it's all based on your perception and your interpretation. Like, you can talk to 10 different IRS agencies and you'll come up with 10 different numbers, and so it just depends on the person that you get in place. So as long as you have things documented, you have things tied out, and you have things supported, and you're able to support your answer, and we support all of our work papers and things are supported with recent court rulings. And so if there was a ruling that says you can write this off, we say, hey, listen, this just passed in December, we should be able to write it off. So as long as everything is supported and we can reasonably say, we've looked at everything and this is how we interpreted it, then that's how we're able to help our companies not get into a lot of trouble when the IRS auditors come.
So if you're listening to this podcast and you don't already understand why this is super important, you got to hit these people up. DopeCFO.com. We're talking with Naomi Granger. She's the co-founder and COO of Dope CFO. Now, you've built a DIY accounting training program and you host webinars on the subject as well. Tell me more about how you take and help accountants that want to get into the industry, either through webinars or your DIY program.
Awesome. Absolutely. So our program is in 3 phases. So phase 1 is finding motivated clients. So we take our members of the program through different ways that we've found these license holders, which they're everywhere. There's 10,000 licenses in California. Oklahoma just issued 3,000 licenses. I think there's over 30,000 licenses in the country. And so they're everywhere. We show you different ways how to find these license holders. We show you how to talk to them, what you should be emailing them, or if you meet them in person, or if you get them on the phone, what types of things you should be saying, and what types of questions you should be asking so that you can understand if they're doing things right or if they're doing things wrong. And you can help them by saying, I can help you in this way because I see XYZ is missing. And so we help you have that conversation and land your first client. We help you figure out what your pricing should be. And then we also help you with different offer letters and proposals. And then once you land your first client, the second phase of the program is providing a world-class system. So we give you the system that you need so that you can service these clients. We show you how to onboard these clients, which type of documents you should be asking for, legal documents, their licensing documents, bank statements, things like that. We show you how to, we give you the chart of accounts that you should use in your accounting system so that you can do proper cost accounting. We give you flower calendars, which is something that we use for growers because you have to know the stage of growth of the plants in order to account for it properly, so that you can know how much should be in WIP and finished goods. So we give you all of that. So we give you everything that you need to close the books at the end of each month, end of each quarter, and the end of each year. And then the third phase of the program is just becoming, we use the acronym VIP, which is just really becoming an expert in the industry. And so we give you access to all of the recent case studies or all the recent court cases that have shaped this industry. We debate and discuss these things. And then we also have like a portion of the program, which is a live portion to kind of supplement. So there's an online portal where you get all the information. And then there's a live portion because as the industry changes, we have to keep up to date with new laws and regulations. And so we supplement that and we answer questions there. And it's just a private community. You can network with other members and other cannabis professionals. Some of our members have partnered together and built huge firms. So there's just that opportunity and we also have a lot of discussion and debate. When a new court case comes down, it's not a black and white answer. It's typically, this is my perception, this is my perception. And then you get a couple of things and you kind of can come up with, okay, this is what I think is the best route to take based on the discussion that I've had over it. So it's just like you have the training and you have the community so that you can really be successful in this space.
Man, that sounds like a no-brainer for a CPA looking to get into this space. And I'm not just a homer. It sounds really cool. I'm not a CPA. I have no skin in the game on this, but it just sounds like that'd be a very helpful thing to have. Now, is this your first venture into entrepreneurialism in terms of Dope CFO?
No, this is not my first time or my first business that I've tried. I actually left corporate about 3 years ago. And for 2 years, I was just trying different things because I knew that I wanted to have a remote business. I wanted to be able to work from my computer and I wanted to be able to travel a lot. And at the beginning, I was thinking there's no way I could do this as an accountant because my whole world of accounting was you had to physically be at somebody's office in their cubicle looking through all their papers and things. And then I came across the opportunity to learn how to build a remote accounting firm. And so then I started that. And that's where I actually met Andrew. And I learned in this training program that you need to you need to pick one niche and become an expert in that niche. And that is the only way that you can 10x your revenues and 10x your business. When you're just trying to be a generalist and doing any niche that comes to you and any service, if it's taxes, accounting, payroll that comes to you, that's when you kind of get into this area where you feel like you're overworked and underpaid. So when I bounced around to a bunch of different niches and I realized that a lot of these companies just don't make enough money to pay me what I need, or I'd have to have 20 and 30 clients in order to just live off of it. And then I came across the cannabis niche and then it just took off from there. Like it was a no-brainer when I learned about it and I learned about how underserved it was. I just knew it and it just took off on day one when I started in the cannabis niche.
And that's nuts. It takes me back. We've been doing this show over 3 years now, almost to our 90th episode. And one of my favorite bits of advice I've gotten from an entrepreneur is to take your skills, find a niche, and apply your skills to a niche, and that's when you're going to have success. So it's just funny. I've heard a couple of entrepreneurs say that since then. And so when you brought it up, I was like, man, that is so gold. but I don't think people talk about it enough. But that really is it. You take what you do well, apply it to a niche that needs it, and that's the success, because you're bringing your skill to an industry that needs your skill, and then just building it off of that. Now, as an entrepreneur, do you have something in your mind that helps you get by, and maybe a trait or a quality or something that you think entrepreneurs need to have that success?
I am always trying to learn. So I'm always open for new ideas. And I know that this is brand new. So I know that the way that we're raised, the way that our education system works, is we've been trained for our entire life to be employees, be perfect, have everything stable income, all this stuff, predictable. And that's the biggest thing that I had to let go of. I had to understand that I don't have to be perfect. Like we've had a huge success, and we still have typos in some of our webinars. You know, there's New York Times bestsellers out there that have typos in them. And then you have to understand that the person who's looking for the typo isn't your client anyways. They're not looking for your service. They're looking to break you down. If they're looking to say, oh, well, I can't join this program because you misspelled there. There, you know, things like that. People who are looking for those things, it doesn't matter what you do. You could have gotten it right. They will find something else. That's not your client. The people who are able to look at the substance of what you're telling them and what you're teaching them, and see how to apply this to my life and how to, you know, build my business with this information, those are the people who are your clients. And so the biggest thing I had to do was get away from being perfect. And I had to get away from, you know, knowing, you know, you do want a sense of stability, but sometimes, like some months we don't get a distribution, and some months we get a really big distribution. So you have to be able to balance that out and work through that. And I also work from home. And so sometimes I feel like I'm not a productive member of society because I don't get up and put on my clothes and drive to an office. And because I did that for 12 years, and to roll out of bed and just turn on my computer and stuff. And, you know, I'm like, everybody else is in traffic and all that. Am I supposed to be doing that? And I get that in my head every so often, but then I have to push it away and say, I'm doing really good. I'm doing good in the society.
I'm the same way. I work remotely as well. And it's not even just the missing out on traffic or going somewhere, because I identify with you 100% and not being involved. There are some days where I have to work all day and I don't leave the house. I'm like, this is me living as a hobbit in my little grassy knoll. But you also, how do you deal with, or does it bother you, I guess, not physically interacting with people on a daily basis? Because sometimes that gets to me where I'm just like, is anyone even paying attention to what we're doing? You know, because you don't have that coworker feedback.
Yeah, so I'm actually introverted, so I like not having to deal with a lot of people every day. The only downfall is that you're not meeting new people. So if you're traveling, or like I recently moved, I lived in Florida and Georgia. I've lived on the East for a very long time. I left home, went to college, and lived there and have a nice network of friends. And I just recently moved back to Vegas about 2 years ago. And I realized that I don't really know people like that are like-minded or business-minded or entrepreneurial here in Vegas. I don't know that many people. And it's because I'm not out there to meet them. Like sometimes I'll go to coffee shop, but last time I was at a coffee shop, I got solicited by so many MLM businesses that I was like, forget it, I'm not coming back here. So what I decided to do was just try going to different networking events, like the Chamber of Commerce events or the BNI events. So I've been to a couple of those to get to know people, but I actually do just like I'm such a homebody. I'm very introverted, and that was one of my biggest things when I left corporate. You can't control the mindset of the people that you work with when you're working corporate. And sometimes you may or may not get along with the person, but you can't control that. But when you're an entrepreneur, you have complete control over who you bring into your circle. And I like to keep positive people in my circle. I like to keep people who are taking me to the next level in my circle. I like to keep people who I can have those higher level discussions with in my circle. So I do like the fact that I can pick and choose the people that I have around me and I have in my business. So there's pros and cons, but I like this. I like this much better.
I completely identify it, and I think when you talk about entrepreneurialism and those traits, what you just said is something that I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs echo. I mean, heck, I was even listening to the Joe Rogan podcast the other day. Man, who was on? I want to say it was Kevin Hart, and he was talking about his inner circle and just surrounding yourself with people who are on that same mental level as you, if not higher. People are, he was talking about his relationship with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and how they're both such just go people. And that's why he loves that relationship, because they're both pushing each other. And I think you're exactly right. In entrepreneurialism, you can find and surround yourself with those people, and that's what makes it exciting, because everyone's doing something that's exciting and working on something that's exciting. And I completely agree. The corporate grind really takes a toll on people, and it makes it hard to be around certain people. So I identify with you there. I'm part introvert, part extrovert. So I'm a mix. Some days I love not dealing with people, and other days I'm like, oh, I'm so lonely, and I just hang out with my dog and my cats while I work. Last question, Naomi, before we get you out of here. What does the future look like for Dope CFO? What's the next year look like? And then where do you want to see this company get to?
Yeah, so we want to grow to become, we are already the only training company, and we want to get that message out that if you're a business owner in the cannabis space and you need an accountant, Dope CFO is where you come. Right now we have over 200 member firms who have gone through our training, and by the end of the year we want that to be well over 1,000, because there's 30,000 cannabis licenses out there. So there's more than enough space for a lot of accountants to come in and build a business here. So we want to make sure that we get the message out there, so that these business owners understand the risk of not doing it right, and understand what they should be looking for when they're hiring an accountant, and to make sure that they're getting a qualified accountant in place. So we just want to grow it as big as possible. We want to make sure that the message is heard. We also want to make sure that the message is heard that these businesses need to stop trying to look for the quick fix or the workaround to get out of their taxes, and focus on the long term, focus on their valuations, and looking towards the future, and seeing so that they can be able to have huge buyouts and paydays in the future, rather than focusing on quick gains and, saving $100K this year. And in the long run, that could have been, 100 million. So we want to make sure that we're getting that message across, how important the accounting is, how important to have the right person in place, and how important it is for these companies to just focus on doing it right and not trying to get quick wins.
And just to speak for a second to your audience, the people that you're trying to talk to who are listening to this show, they might say, oh, I don't know if I can afford an accountant, or, what's the ROI on bringing in someone to help me here? If this accountant saves you, you're talking about 70,000, 100,000 tax bills that you might not know that you might be coming up against, $1 million burdens too. So bringing in someone who helps you with that stuff, it offsets it. Even if you don't know, it's going to offset it in the future. It's just so much safer to do this the right way out of the gate. And I don't have a business that sells flour, or I'm not a big ancillary company that deals with this, but I can see that this makes a lot of sense. And if I can see it, you should be seeing it. Or, you could take your chances and see what happens. There are a lot of examples why you shouldn't do that. Instead, you should hit up Naomi Granger, again, co-founder and COO, dopecfo.com, linked in the description below. Naomi, fantastic job on the podcast. I told you I'd run late. I'm almost 50 minutes now, so we're going to wrap it up. But I always say this, and I definitely mean it. If you guys have some big news in the future or something you want to come back on and talk about, reach out. You got my email, and we'll get you back on the show and talk about it, okay?
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
That's going to do it for us on the show this afternoon. Again, big thanks to our guest, Naomi Granger. One more time, dopecfo.com. Thank you for listening wherever you are, be it on iTunes, SoundCloud, or StayRooted.com. Last quick reminder to both subscribe to the show and check out Rooted TV, our bi-weekly. It airs 2 times a month. Okay, we release 2 new episodes a month through High Times TV, Cannabis Club TV, StayRooted.com, and we're working on a couple more distribution platforms as well. So maybe coming soon to a streaming service near you. Pay attention for that. But that's going to do it for us on the podcast this afternoon, okay? My name's Tim Stromble, and I remind you to work hard, be humble, and stay rooted. See you next week, everybody.